Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Winnie Shen, a VP of our Data Cloud based out of our New York City headquarters. I'm part of the solutions side of our business, supporting our internal teams with connecting brands to consumers through our identity-based data cloud. I have the pleasure of introducing the Using Identity Management to Deliver True One-to-One Personalization, hosted by Neej Gaur, president of our Data Cloud at Zeta Global. He'll be joined by Rachel Dudley, Global Head of CRM at Sonos, Dennis Ellis, VP of Product and GM of Identity Infrastructure of LiveRamp, and David Shea, a Senior VP of our Customer Experience Solutions Group. As seen throughout the presentations, individualization is particularly relevant in the current environment as we move into a cookieless world and need to adapt to dynamic shifts in consumer media consumption. It helps us identify the individual in a privacy compliant manner, understand who that person is and what are their interests and intent, reach them across online and offline channels, and really engage with that consumer with the right message and the right medium in the moment of time that matters. So to further explore these concepts, I'd like to pass it over to Neej.
Thank you so much, Winnie, and what a joy it is to be with you all today and to follow the great John Scully and his panel discussion. So my name again is Neej Gaur. I'm the president of the Data Cloud here at Zeta, and I have a great panel for you today. We're going to talk about identity, we're going to talk about personalization, and I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves personally in just one sec. But before we do that, I want to kick off with a cool quote from Dr. Seuss that I think sets the tone and gets the ideas flowing. So Dr. Seuss famously said, "Be who you are and say what you feel, because those who mind don't matter and those who matter don't mind." So, we're going to be talking a lot about identity and how it's used in the promise. And so what I'd love to do to start off today's session is to really have each panelist introduce themselves and maybe just tell us about one personalized experience that they received recently that really blew their socks off, they really enjoyed. So let's start with Rachel.
Thanks,
and welcome.
Neej. Thank you. I'm Rachel Dudley. I oversee CRM at Sonos. We're a sound experience company. I sit on the direct-to-consumer team, so I'm really responsible for thinking about how we bring those experiences to our customers and foster those one-to-one relationships through e-commerce, email, and in-app messaging. And an experience that I had recently is with a brand called Pros. These gentlemen may or may not be familiar. I'm not sure how into hair care you are, but hopefully others in the group may have heard. And I think what struck me is that their entire brand experience is grounded in personalization. So it's not just buying behavior, it's not just retargeting, it's truly, you can't purchase a product that's not personalized for you. And I thought that it was just such an interesting take on personalization, and truly like the core of, I think, what we're all trying to get at and do is really provide that one-to-one experience with our customers, all the way down to hair care for my zip code. And so while I'm not sure if it's truly making a difference, and if, if I was in a different zip code, if the treatment for my hair might look different, but I think that it's a really great brand that we can all take a few cues from.
Yeah, it's really cool. How about you, Dennis?
Hey, thanks for having me. Actually, the Dr. Seuss quote is perfect. I literally have it on a metal plaque in my house, around the corner. So it's so apt for today. My name is Dennis Ellis, everyone. I head up our identity business at LiveRamp. So all of the products that do the transformation, the resolution, and ultimately the connectivity of customer data fall into my business unit. The personalized experience, I think like many of us under COVID, I've probably seen my TV consumption go up quite a bit. And in fact, with the return of the NFL, decided that I needed a package that would allow me to actually watch sports again. And so I signed up for YouTube TV, and I've got to tell you, it's like a transformational experience from a TV viewing standpoint. And whether it's my DVR content, it's live content that YouTube thinks I'll be interested in, or it's kind of the traditional channel browsing experience, the way it's set up, the way they sort the channels, like all of it is personalized to my viewing habits, which I really appreciate as a consumer.
That's awesome. And David, last but not least.
Great, thank you. Hi, I'm David Shea. I run the customer experience practice here at Zeta Global, basically helping brands leverage data to deliver better outcomes. And unfortunately, I wish I could say I'm a better hair care product, or else, because that does sound really good. But I'll speak to all the parents out there in a recent experience that I had during the back to school finding a laptop was almost impossible. So anyone who who has a child in school kind of knows what I mean. And so I was really impressed with kind of a larger brand, but Best Buy, with how they actually adapted to that. So they created really an omni-channel immersive experience, adding even a parent portal, which really spoke to exactly those issues. But even the in-store experience, which I think also gets forgotten a lot of times, they really customized that down to an individual level. So they really won me over with how they handled what was a very stressful situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I empathize for you, not with you yet. And I think from my perspective, the brand that actually has impressed me is a wine brand, a direct-to-consumer brand called First Leaf. They have you fill out some questions, they send you your first box of wine, and then as you go along, they get more information out of you as to what you liked and didn't like. And it's probably not the brand for the sommelier, but it's a great brand to introduce you to a lot of wines and to give you a really kind of unique experience around wine tasting. So that's been my COVID personalized story. So let's go to the next slide. So the promise of personalization is really, and identity really is around these 4 boxes. And people have been talking about the 360-degree view for as long as I can remember, right? So today we're going to focus mainly on the upper right around personalization and orchestration. But the identity foundation that we're really building in today's marketing ecosystem serves a lot of different functions. One is around accuracy, so completeness of your data. It also drives towards building insights into opportunities. We'll spend a little bit of time on that today. And of course, it's critical on closing the loop around attribution and measurement. And so, with the big news around the deprecation of the third-party cookie, it's very concerning to a lot of publishers that don't have identity-based systems as to what they're going to do, because their media may not be as valuable as it used to be if there is no attribution tied in. And last but not least, by any means, the notion of compliance. So the ability to know your customer and to really follow the policies of CCPA and GDPR. These are all the promises of identity. But what we found is that there's really a pretty big gap between what marketers want to realize and what they do realize. Can we go to the next slide, please, Megan? So it's data. This is the way we think of it. And we're going to go into more discussion on this as we go through with the presenters. But we really think that you need an identity-based foundation before you do anything in the marketing space, especially in today's world with a very evolving ecosystem. On top of that, you add signals, and the right signals, the ones that are the most meaningful. That helps to create opportunities. And then, really the point of departure for all of this and what actually touches the marketer and touches the consumer is the personalization. So I want to move to the next slide and start with some of the challenges that our panel has felt. So obviously, there is an identity crisis happening right now in marketing. And that's not just about the deprecation of the cookie, but it's also just around how fragmented the marketing universe has become around identity. And here you can see some of the challenges that our panelists and others have experienced, I'm sure. This comes from Forrester. So I wanted to start with Rachel and just quickly ask you, where do you see the most impact of identity in the Sonos ecosystem? You guys have a high value purchased item. And where are some of the challenges that you have experienced in your environment at Sonos? We might start there and we'll move to Dennis too.
Yeah, so I think speaking from recent examples, I think it's no secret that we've experienced this acceleration of digital growth and buying behaviors over the last few months. And one of the ways that we've really seen identity play a role at Sonos, and I think it's kind of the general theme that we try to focus on, is really keeping it simple. When you think about the opportunity and challenge, they're kind of the same. There's this just massive amount of data that exists, and it's really focusing on the things that make sense for you and what you're trying to optimize against. So one of the things that we've actually seen is the consideration cycle shorten for us. And so what does that mean from our traditional customer triggers and from some of the work that we're doing against personalization? So we've spent the last few months really focusing on high intent triggers and high intent tactics to really drive those folks across the finish line. And we've seen that pay off in dividends. So I think that, again, it's really about focusing on the things that you're trying to optimize against and those 1 or 2 key insights. From a core challenge standpoint, I would expect it to not be a surprise to many that they're kind of like the three big things. One is your tech stack and really identifying the things that are crippling you. We like to refer to ourselves as a 16-year-old startup. And so that comes with the fun energy of a startup, but also a long legacy of tech debt. And so we've spent the last couple of years really restructuring our organization, but also restructuring our tech stack around how we can optimize for what the solutions we're trying to solve for the customer are. And then once we're kind of there, it's really about being agile and scalable. And I think that they're kind of like two pretty big buzzwords, but the agility piece, especially in the last 6 to 7 months, has been more important than ever. In really allowing our teams to pivot. And that's a testament to the organizational structure that we've kind of defined. And then finally, like the scalability piece. So really trying to understand, okay, these are the things that are working. These are the things that we want to optimize against, and then going from there.
Got it. That makes a ton of sense. And, a follow on to that for Dennis, what are some of the challenges you hear? And there's a lot of focus or refocus around using email or hashed email as sort of the center of the new identity world. And I want to get your perspective and the perspective on LiveRamp's on how we think that's going to persist and how you view fragmentation across the industry, either coming together or unifying, or what your POV on that really looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll kind of take that backwards. I think we've seen fragmentation increase year after year as new technologies come online, new providers come online. And really, I think the moment in time that we're seeing is a chance for us to come together. And it's not about one ID or one set of kind of solutions to rule them all. I think instead, what we're seeing is a big push for interoperability, is the ability to actually like have that. Rachel, you referenced the tech stack. I think it's so perfect, right? Is the ability to have my identity foundation, my identity framework really wrap around my tech stack rather than be my tech stack. And I think that's really critical as we move forward. On the point of the email as an identifier, I think there is a fair value exchange that happens between a publisher and a consumer, and an email is potentially a piece of that. But at the end of the day, I don't think email is identity. I think it's a piece of identity. It's certainly an identifier. And we have to think about that. We have to think about how do we wrap the rest of our business and the rest of our customer relationship into that relationship that we may have from an addressability standpoint with the email address. I think the other thing that I personally shy away from and kind of advocate the industry to shy away from is any single ID that does not have client-specific encodings. The mobile ad ID, I think, is the best example of that today, and we see the pressure that that's under. But as we move forward, I don't think we're going to be in a world where we could trust that we'll all see exactly the same ID for the same person. We may have the same kind of identity framework, and we may have the same identifier type, but that needs to be encoded and needs to be protected such that if the underlying asset isn't ours already, there is no connectivity available to that, and there's no modeling or learning that happens around it.
I think that's exactly right. And I think you brought up a good point. And even at Zeta, we think in the context of people, not IDs, because IDs are just basically one representation of a person on one potentially channel or one network. And so and LiveRamp's a big part of the way we stitch together identity here at Zeta as well. So and to your last point, I think this is a good kind of question for David. The value exchange that Dennis speaks about between identity that a consumer would share and in exchange for getting personalization and other services. Do you think that in your discussions with marketers, is that a well understood value exchange? How is that really being perceived these days?
So I think I think overall, with a lot of customers today, they don't fully understand that value exchange to its full context, and so I do believe that most customers they can better maximize that value exchange, but then also brands can help maximize that value exchange as well by better leveraging and understanding the data that they're collecting about those customers and being able to personalize communications back to those individuals. So as an example, being able to better understand exactly what are those levers that are really important to an individual? So what is that value? Is it really around price? Is it around service? Is it around is it around maybe what the brand stands for and its ethos, or around a social cause? So the more that a brand can really understand that and then elicit that value back to that customer, it creates more of a mutually beneficial relationship. And that's a lot of what I'm working with brands on today, is being able to help personalize that and leverage the signals that we're being able to collect to help understand at an individual level what is really important to that person, and then how do you actually deliver the appropriate value back to that individual so they see that they're receiving value, but at the same end, the company is receiving value with that consumer's interaction with that brand.
It totally makes sense. And I think all of these challenges that I have up on the slide, I think if you can solve the trust problem, you can basically solve all of these problems along the way, right? So if consumers can trust that their identity is being used in ways that are beneficial to them, and they're agreeing to provide that permission to use their identity, then a lot of these become derivative problems that become really just opportunities to solve. Megan, let's go to the next slide. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about signals and enrichment, and this is a little bit hard to read, but basically the general idea is that, you know, there's so much data out there right now, and, you know, in some cases marketers will say, oh, we don't have enough data. In other cases, marketers will say, oh, we have too much data. But it's not all signals that are created equal, right? So there's a few different dimensions to this. One dimension is around what consumers are really willing to share with familiar brands or brands they don't know. And this is coming from Gartner, actually. And then the other dimension is around what's really adding value. And so, Rachel, you had actually mentioned in our previous question about high intent signals and, you know, really having strong buyer signals. Can you talk a little bit more about how you get those and, you know, where and how you cultivate those and manage those within your environment?
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, it's really those signals come from the customer, and I think that that's really what it's all about. So we largely use behavioral retargeting, and when you think about kind of like the relationship between interest and intent, it's really about where they are in the funnel ultimately, which kind of almost feels like marketing 101, but it's thinking about, you know, if they're exhibiting interest, what are you doing to show them, you know, compelling reasons why you're the one? And if they're exhibiting intent, what are you doing to provide easy and facilitate that path to purchase? And so we really let the customer essentially tell us. So everything from, for example, if they're browsing a page on our website, then, you know, you're retargeting them with a strategic email campaign, perhaps, or if they're showing cart abandon on site, then, you know, you have some disengagement tactics that indicate, like, based on the customer and their browse path on site, what we know other customers have resonated. So are we exhibiting financing, or are we showing them Apple Pay, or are we showing them things that we know are going to make their experience ultimately easier? And so I think ultimately, not to kind of like make it redundant, but it's just really about the solution that you're trying to solve for the customer, or the challenge you're trying to solve for the customer.
Yeah, we have, you know, at Zeta, we cultivate, you know, 700 plus of our own audiences that are specific to interest and intent. And the question we always get is, well, how do you know if a customer is interested versus having intent, right? So this is a consistently evolving problem that we're solving for. We're always recalculating, rescoring, and, you know, the custom audiences have become a pretty popular feature for a number of our clients. I also wanted to spend a minute with Dennis on this question, talking about the LiveRamp data store. I know it's become a big part of the LiveRamp story, and you know, you can see some of the data categories here. We consider independent parts or ingredients of data as part of larger models that are used to calculate intent and interest. But how does the data store factor into this, and really, you know, what's the vision where you're going with that right now?
Yeah, absolutely. The data store, as many of you know, but for those who don't, you know, is a marketplace that LiveRamp enables. So LiveRamp doesn't manufacture any audiences. We don't curate any data. Instead, we work with hundreds of partners around the ecosystem who then can do those things and want to put those audiences up for use. And I think the advice I have when thinking about any sort of data acquisition strategy is really twofold, and it gets back maybe to Rachel's first point, which is like keep it simple and put the big things first, right? Or the first things first is, I can't remember which coach says that, but I'll steal it here. And in that, it's like, what's the objective? Ultimately, what is the goal that you want this data to serve inside of your organization? And that'll dictate acquisition path, right? Whether it's a third-party audience, a second-party partnership, or ultimately first-party data that you need to build a strategy to collect. And I think type of data also matters a lot there. And as we go forward inside of the LiveRamp marketplace, I think you'll continue to see as different identifiers like cookies are pressured, that data practices, data collection practices, data curation practices like need to change and they need to evolve. And in order to do that, ultimately there is an identity strategy at the core there. And so, for us, I think it's identity at the core, data that augments that identity, which is more about, the things that a person may, or the ways that a person may show up with your brand, and then ultimately action, right? Like, what do we do with that, and how do we capture the value from that data that we're ultimately seeking to capture in our customer relationships?
We call that identity signals and connectivity, and obviously LiveRamp's a big part of that for us as well. I thought it was really interesting on the slide that browsing behavior is something people were really willing to share with brands they were familiar with, because I know that that's actually really what's in target with a lot of the cookie. Well, I'd say for brands you're familiar with and brands you aren't familiar with, actually probably is more of the problem. But that's an interesting statistic here that, if you have history with a brand and you want to let them personalize experiences for you, it seems like that's still something that consumers are interested in doing.
Yeah, it's also probably the most paralleled, right, to like the real world, is that when I talk to friends about it, the question is like, well, when you walk into a store, you want the store to engage you, right? You want them to kind of talk you through the path. You want them to optimize the path. It's the same thing in the digital experience. I think people can be comfortable with that.
Yep. And purchase history too, right? Your past purchase history is a strong predictor of things they should probably be sending to you, or your style. So that's something that people are pretty comfortable with, as you can tell from this plot as well. Let's go to the next slide. And we touched on really creating opportunities. One of Zeta's key themes, as you've heard reiterated again and again today, is around our ability to help create opportunities for our marketers. And whether we are housing their data as part of our CDM or through one of our marketing solutions or email solutions, or if we're just using our data to create opportunities, this is something we've really focused on in 2020. And I want to actually go to David here and just talk about a couple of situations that you've experienced that in terms of marketers' ability to create opportunities with us and what their challenges were. And as we do that, we can go to the next slide. And one quick thing before we get there, if anyone has questions from the audience, please feel free to drop them in the box. We're going to address those at the end, and we'll have some time for that. So these are some opportunity types that I know we see often. David, if you want to kind of reference one of them and or two of them and talk through some examples.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you really look at all these different opportunity types, and what I work with clients today is maximizing outcomes. So all of these are delivering some type of outcome, and that could be ranging from acquiring new customers, growing the value of those customers, or retaining customers and preventing churn. So as an example of one of these, I'm working with a leading online retailer, and they're looking to leverage data in motion and these different signals that we've all been talking about to better predict things like lifetime value, next best product, and even price sensitivity. And all of these are really to deliver a personalized experience across disparate channels, but then also optimize the overall customer experience to grow customer value. Another example for a large fashion retailer, we're looking at changes in the competitive landscape. So things that are specific during COVID, so things like store closings, changing purchase, channel preferences, and other signals, and seeing how that can potentially help acquire new customers, especially now that you're seeing customers in a place where maybe they're left with fewer different choices during COVID. So how can other brands help maximize on that opportunity and deliver a better customer experience?
Got it. It makes a ton of sense. And I mean, I think there are lots of ways to find opportunities. Rachel, I think you already mentioned the high intent signals that you guys have. Do you guys create dashboards internally to try to surface those to your teams, or how do you bring those types of opportunities into kind of a visual format?
Yeah, we love dashboards. So we use a number of different tools, and we have a number of different. So one of the things that we are actually in a fortunate position is that our product is, we have usage data. So we are able to access, not only what our customers own and buy, but also how they're using our product, which is both a challenge and an opportunity. And I think there's a lot of relational elements that I think are undervalued when you think about personalization specifically, and the engagement factor is kind of one of them. So when you think about personalization, you're often thinking about how you optimize against that purchase journey, but really like what happens after is a lot of where you foster that long-term loyalty. And so we think about it in a number of different ways. From a visualization standpoint, we focus a lot on the relational elements of both that purchase and that usage. So for example, we have developed an enterprise segmentation strategy based on a number of different factors, both ownership tenure, product mix, usage, last time they engaged with the brand, et cetera. And then from there, we start to visualize the communications that we're sending against those, and then also the outcome of that. So did they, act or react in a way that we expected them to? Did they not? What did they purchase as a result? So it's kind of looking at that in like a holistic sense versus just some of the KPIs in isolation or some of the identification factors in isolation.
Yeah, we found that when we moved our opportunity dashboards from single point in time to longitudinal, the value that they created for marketers to track trends was just much more powerful. So that was a big shift in our thinking around opportunities this year that happened as well. I want to move to our last topic, which is really how do you put this all together and personalize. So if we go to the next slide. All right, so I refer to personalization as the point of departure only because I think that this is what is becoming the norm, right? This is what consumers are expecting. Some different data points here. Consumers spend more when they're receiving personalized experiences. They get more frustrated if things have nothing to do with them. These are intuitive sort of insights here. And on the left, some insights about marketers in terms of driving engagement or driving to completed purchases. We know that personalization works. It still is very hard to get to. And so one question I had for Rachel was around what are the channels you're currently using for your personalization strategy? Is it just email? Is it online, web? Just go into the channels and kind of how you approach them, how you think about them.
Yeah, so currently we're focused specifically on e-commerce, email, and in-app. So we have a great opportunity to connect with our customers and really drive engagement, especially within the context of in-app, because there's, we can not only recommend content, but we can also recommend system upgrades or updates. Like you can get really, really tailored and specific, especially just given the nature of the space. So I think that's probably like first and foremost how we think about personalization. It's not just broad sweeping, it's obviously channel specific. Sure. And then from an e-commerce standpoint, it's really important to think about how we personalize the experience based on the things that we know about them. But then one of our KPIs recently is to really increase login because it exponentially increases our ability to tailor those experiences and do so in a way that enables us to do that at scale from a data standpoint. So, you have a limited amount of data for when people come to your site that you can identify, but once they're logged in, that really unlocks the box and allows us to really
do you look at personalization holistically, or do you have different teams that work on a channel by channel basis, or how is your organization set up to best kind of address the customer?
Yeah, so we've actually recently restructured, and I think it's been a really a massive unlock in bringing the data team more under our umbrella, which is essentially foundational to any type of personalization. I think there's still progress to make against how we start to connect some of those media experiences. One of the things we like to say is don't ship the org. A customer doesn't know that the e-commerce team is building a landing page and the media team is building a media campaign. And I think oftentimes that's how they're showing up to the customer. Or brands are showing up to the customer. So we centralize e-commerce and CRM and data, and then we work direct or closely with the media team. But ultimately, I think that that's really the next step in that omnichannel experience.
And we're definitely finding, and David, I can let you speak to this in a second, but we're definitely finding that the walls in marketing that have traditionally existed are coming down. So your CMO has, first of all, a very, very data-driven mindset in the modern day organization. And acquisition and retention marketing and growth marketing have all started to blend together, because in many cases you have to reacquire a customer that was already your customer. And you have to win back someone that was already your customer, so that the lines have started to blur. But to Dennis' point from earlier, the only way you can really be successful with that is through identity, right? Foundation and identity, and being able to see a person's identity across their entire life cycle. So I wanted to ask the same question of you, David. What channels do marketers typically go with first when you work with them from a personalization perspective? What's the lowest hanging fruit that they should be tackling, and and where does it go from there?
Great, thanks, Nish. So when I think of personalization, I really think of all the different marketing, what I'll call levers that you can pull. So it's everything from channel to sentiment to message to offer. When you think about it, that's really at the end of the day what a marketer can control. So typically, we like to start, in a lot of brands that I work with, we'll start with channel, and usually channels such as a lot of, whether it's an own channel, like an email, because typically a lot of, kind of a shameless plug for our own ZMP, has the ability to actually be able to personalize the experiences very easily and do dynamic content and creative. But then same thing in own channels, in paid channels, being able to personalize across, let's say, programmatic, or across a display, or even across a prospect email. Really, the ability to personalize, and where we are right now is kind of unparalleled to where I've seen before in the past. But being able to personalize, and what I work with a lot of brands, so for example, working with, let's say, a lot of brands today within travel and hospitality, being able to personalize and understand what lever actually drives the most, the biggest outcome. So is it the channel? Is it the message? Is it the offer? Is it the frequency? And understand the individual level what really drives that. And when we see that we get the right mix together, you can really see a 30, 40, 50% increase in performance by getting the personalized message in front of the right person, a personalized experience in front of the right person, versus a control group, or versus a non-personalized experience.
And I work with David a lot, and this is something that's very near and dear to his heart. So I know he really wants to get the channel and media strategy right for our customers, and I hear this a lot from him. So I'm not surprised that you answered that way. If we could go to the next slide, please. So we're getting short on time, so I wanted to leave you guys with a few takeaways. And these are things that are, pretty foundational, but also good to reiterate. So we've discussed a couple topics today. So the first and foremost is, start with an identity foundation that's built for what you need it to do. And don't think about IDs independently. Think about them in the construct of a person that has many different IDs potentially associated with them. Find the right signals, the high intent signals and interest signals that you need to power your business. Use those to surface the right opportunities on the right channels. And only with that type of foundation can you really get to personalization. And personalization, again, is the output of these three inputs, right? So it's what you get to once you have these three other pieces in place. And I'd like to, before we get to questions, and one last plug for Zeta, just ask Rachel and Dennis, 2021's coming, new year. What's the big innovation that Sonos is focused on and LiveRamp's focused on? Rachel, I guess you first.
Yeah, sure. So I think first and foremost, it's really sustaining the momentum that we've seen over the past 7 months. Like we're just seeing such a shift in behaviors and an acceleration, especially in direct consumer buying. So thinking about things like virtual reality and really bringing the in-store experience, listening to our products is a really big part of the buying experience. So how do we start to meet those customers where they're at in a way that matches the state of the world today? And then I think secondly, which is something that I kind of spoke to, where the undervalued nature of usage and engagement as part of personalization. So really going beyond the kind of like that buying cycle and fostering that long-term loyalty, because I think, you know, I joined the John Scully discussion before this, and he mentioned that a lot of these behaviors after the world might return back to normal, or what the new normal is, are going to stick. So how do you start to foster that long-term brand engagement and long-term loyalty? So those are a lot of the things that we're focusing on and are the big rocks for 2021. But if I could also just build on one thing that David said around finding the right signals and finding the right channels, et cetera, is when you attend these sessions, you often hear that like organizational structure or your tech stack are kind of like the two things you really need to get in order. And while that's definitely true, one of the things that we that allowed us to be agile in these moments is that we started with squads about a year ago. And we focused on maybe, you know, 2 or 3 really, you know, people that are experts in performance or experts in CRM or experts in e-commerce. And we isolated some of the hypotheses that we had and focused in on 1 or 2 data points and just started to test those and measure the incrementality against that. And that allowed us to go back to the organization and say, okay, this is really working, and this is something that we should maybe reorient ourselves around because it is making a big difference. So you don't have to kind of like shift the org overnight. It's really about taking kind of like those small baby steps.
And I think to your point, if you have a good test and control framework in place, you can just do a lot with what you already have. You know, I think a lot of people miss that last step and don't do it correctly, so they end up with a situation they don't fully understand. So I 100% agree with you on that point. And Dennis, same question over to you about 2021.
At first, I want to emphatically agree. I think if you do nothing else, put the scientific method up on your wall. Like every day, I look at the scientific method and I think about it and I think, hey, what's our hypothesis? How are we testing against that hypothesis? How are we measuring that? And what are we going to learn from it? What do we want to take back and do differently as a result of this test? And I think everyone needs to do that. You know, we're all experimenters by nature, and so when you experiment, make sure you're doing so, I would say, safely from a brand perspective, but also with kind of intelligent design. I'll also plug for Sonos the Arc Bar. I just bought one and it's amazing. Just mind-blowingly good. And then now for LiveRamp, of these 3, we're really looking at unbundling the identity experience from, you know, a SaaS monolith platform and into really an infrastructure. And so, you know, making sure that, you know, identity is accessible in places where our customers need it, and that it's real time, it's fast, and that it's interoperable. And I talked about interoperability at the top. And, you know, for my team, that's really where we're investing all of our time over the next 12 to 18 months, is really kind of elementalizing the concepts of identity such that it can fit into the stack in a way that it's never been capable of before. I think, you know, for a long time, our industry talked about third-party identity graphs, and those are absolutely vital. But at the same time, like first-party resolution is really critical, right? Getting your first-party data in order, augmenting that with partnerships is really critical. And you do that in a lot of different places potentially. But if you have one through stream that is an identity architecture or identity infrastructure that lets you piece those bits together and translate across the different platforms and needs, I think you're going to be in a much better place for all of those concerns that we saw in the earlier slides, such as addressable reach in my channel, et cetera.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I'm going to extend on that just with one slide and a plug for Zeta. So if we go to the next slide, so Zeta over the last few years has spent tremendous efforts and time building out our value creation that we can offer to customers. And so we really focus on this notion of an opportunity explorer. It can either leverage Zeta data, or it could leverage your data as a customer with our data to even unlock more. And our goal is to really move from this kind of antiquated model of descriptive analytics and diagnostic analytics of, you know, what happened and why it happened, to what should you do next and how should you actually do it? Like, let's put this in actual action for you. So for those of you that are struggling with identity and personalization, I encourage you to reach out to us. LiveRamp is a critical partner of ours and a critical piece of our solution as well. And we really would love to see what we can do to help you. And if we go one slide further, I think there's something we're offering that was mentioned earlier. The Opportunity Explorer is our visual dashboard that we give to our enterprise clients. And so there's essentially a free trial where we can onboard your data, or we can work with our data, and we'll unlock some of the highest value opportunities that are available to you. And so, again, reach out to the Zeta team. They would be happy to set one of these up for you, and you'll be amazed by some of the low-hanging opportunities that are available to you without doing too much work. But again, to get here, and one of the questions that came in as we pivot to questions was, what do you recommend someone as a first and second step in taking all your data points and creating identity and key opportunities? So again, this is a big, big thing to do by yourself. I think you need to leverage your own data, but also have partners in place that can help accelerate some of the work that's really, really time consuming and some of the real kind of nitty gritty work. And Zeta is a good partner for that. LiveRamp's a great partner for that. So we'd love to help you out with those types of situations if you reach out to us. One question that came in, and I'm going to direct this one to Dennis. For a brand without a consumer sale, what is the direction they should be taking on identity with maids and cookies under pressure? So it sounds like they don't actually have a sale-in process, but they still want to cultivate knowledge about their consumer. What do you recommend for that type of environment?
Yeah, and this is where I think partnership strategy is really critical. If there's not a direct consumer sale, there's potentially a channel sale, or there are other ways in which you're engaging with consumers. And so John referenced it in the last panel, but customer experience is about way more than the product you sell. And so thinking about that experience and what are the ways that you can really delight your customers that allow for that engagement and that value exchange, I think becomes critical to building an audience that at first may be a seed audience that you use to derive insights that then can expand onto a larger population. But over time, you can start to append partnership data to and bring in a really rich view of the customer in whatever way your customer is showing up to you.